Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
And you are officially at Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you guys for joining us. Really appreciate it that you listen in. Thank you for the comments that you send to the station on a regular basis. Some very good input as well. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe right here. Subscribe button is right there. And hit follow or for notifications so that when we do a new show, you'll be notified of it. Jerry, we have a guest we've had on a regular basis. He's one of our probably finest analysts that we bring on. He's very trained in this area. It's Stephen Bryen. Give just a little tidbit of bio on Stephen.
Well, Steve is a former Pentagon official during the Reagan era. He was the Deputy Undersecretary for Security and Technology. He was also president of Finmeccanica, which was the U.S. subsidiary of the Italian defense company. But he's probably the most astute military technologist in the swamp of Washington, D.C., to be quite honest about it. He thinks geopolitically about what is feasible and not. And in this case, he really came up with something novel. Novel in one sense, in that it was a way by which the Taiwanese, besieged by threats of an invasion by China, could have access to U.S. F-35Bs. That's the vertical takeoff and landing version. And Steve talks about this in the context of almost the analogy with the U.S. during 1940 supplying Britain at its lowest point with 58 overage destroyers on what was called Lend-Lease.
Right.
And that is, some of the historical background behind it, but it's a testimony to the lack of military relations between the U.S. and Taiwan when Kissinger and Nixon threw over Taiwan essentially to get close to China.
Yes, in the modern vernacular, they threw Taiwan under the bus. And we are slowly starting to reestablish some of those connections and relationships. And God willing, we're going to be able to talk about this on the show and get some really good information. We're also going to be talking about Azerbaijan and Israel's relationship. So, guys, don't go away. We're going to be right back after this break. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Good.
Thank you for joining us. You are watching us on YouTube. We really appreciate it. Make sure you leave a note here and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Okay, here we go in 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I'm Rod Bryant along with Jerry Gordon, and he is an amazing sidekick, still recovering from the hurricane. Can't wait till you get to fullback function. It'd be great. And then, of course, we have our illustrious guest, Stephen Bryen, who has always brought about some great analytical information on the Mideast as well as in Asia. And so we're going to have an interesting discussion today. Jerry, why don't you go ahead and start off with the first question?
Steve, you caused a flurry of interest with a Newsweek article about Taiwan leasing F-35s from the U.S. to deal with a rising Chinese threat. Why don't you tell us what the deal is and why it has captured some very interesting attention both in Taiwan and obviously in Beijing?
Well, it should have. That was the whole point, was to try and stimulate the conversation, because up to now, the U.S. has not agreed to sell F-35s to Taiwan. This is, of course, the stealth fighter. My objective was twofold. One is that Taiwan is in a bit of trouble right now because China is building up its forces, threatening. They just carried out a big invasion military exercise to show they could send thousands of troops into Taiwan and take it over or whatever they're going to do with it. And despite the fact that Taiwan has quite a bit of military equipment, it doesn't have anything at the level of the F-35. Now, I'm talking about a specific kind of F-30. There are three variants. The standard one, what they call the B model, which is a short takeoff and landing, and the C model, which is a carrier model for use on aircraft carriers. The B model is what Taiwan needs. Why do they need it? Because Taiwan's airfields are under direct assault from Chinese missiles. And the expectation is from most of the scenarios and most of the simulations, war games that have been looked at, is that the Chinese will try to destroy all the airfields initially in the start of any fight to take over or to invade Taiwan. The F-35B can take off from your backyard. It doesn't require an airbase. You can put it on a highway or a parking lot with lots of support equipment, of course, but you can make it very difficult for the Chinese, A, to find them, and B, to knock them out before they can get in the air. And if they can get in the air, the Chinese are in trouble because it's a far superior airplane to anything that the Chinese have. So the idea is to give them or get them that airplane somehow. Now, if the U.S. decided tomorrow morning to put them on Taiwan, the Chinese would go nuts. We know that. I mean, we've been there, done that. There would be a big mess, and I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think that we could keep them in the U.S., train the pilots here, and have them on emergency standby. It only takes some hours to get them to Taiwan. They can be refueled in flight. They can get there in overnight. So any dreams that the Chinese have about knocking off Taiwan have to take into account maybe 100 F-35Bs showing up. Okay. And that also relieves the U.S. of having to intervene directly early. We have F-35s in Japan, and we have the possibility of using them from Okinawa, which is fairly close. And so we could deploy them. That, by the way, those are Bs. So we could deploy them, but that puts us directly in the fight right away. The real essence of all this is deterrence. What we want is deterrence. If China thinks it can invade, it will invade, in my opinion. The only thing holding it back right now is they're afraid of President Trump. I think that's the case. What happens if there's another administration? I don't know. I really don't. So I think that where we are is that it would be in our interest, in Taiwan's interest, and in the interest of peace and stability to find a way to provide F-35Bs. Now, I propose a lease, keep them in the U.S. with a lease so Taiwan doesn't have to shell out $10 billion tomorrow morning to buy them and wait 5 years to get them. But a lease, we could even possibly retail, we call it changing the tail of the airplane, so that they become U.S. ones, become Taiwanese ones, if we want to do that. We did it. We have done it before. I mean, we did it with Britain, of course, in World War II, 1940, with the destroyers and the other naval equipment, and with airplanes. Okay, we provided airplanes. So, I mean, there was this famous dialogue, about how they're going to get them to Canada so they could fly them to Britain, because the U.S. Neutrality Act seemed to prevent it. But we figured it out. So the bottom line is that I think that idea has some merit for achieving a number of political objectives, military objectives, and the objective of maintaining stability, peace in the region. That's the thought.
Stephen, go ahead, Jerry. Let me just ask this one question. It sort of dovetails into this idea that China obviously has the equipment to do some damage to Taiwan. The recent border incursion that took place and India basically trumped them pushed them out with a few special operation guys that were there. Is that any indication as to China's abilities at all?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I mean, I don't know enough about that operation to say much, but I think that the Indians were caught with their pants down. So,
they were, but they totally repelled the whole attack.
They did.
The whole incursion. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories about that that still need to be sorted out. One of them is that the Chinese troops were very reluctant to go there in the first place.
Right.
That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, maybe we can pull that up and chat about it one day, because I've done some research on the organization that they have trained since I think they started back during the Vietnam War when Green Berets were coming out, and it's a special group of they're Tibetan fighters, and so it'd be an interesting discussion. But I just didn't know. Well, does this indicate that China maybe don't have the ability to do?
No one really knows anything about China's modern fighting ability. The last time we saw Chinese troops was in 1950, right? That was the last time. It was in Korea, where they used human wave attacks. So it wasn't the sort of modern warfare.
No.
And it was devastating. I mean, they achieved a lot, actually, pushed us back.
Right. Could you imagine how terrifying that would be? Goodness gracious.
Yeah, because they didn't care about the casualties. They were willing to take huge casualties in exchange for holding territory. That was the bottom line. And the kind of warfare then was mainly artillery and, some armor, but mostly artillery and troops running across the areas and trying to attack the other troops.
Right.
Today, it's a little different. I mean, China has modern weapons. It has a fairly decent looking Air Force, on paper at least decent. The airplanes, they have the J-10, the J-11, the Su-35, and the J-20, which is not ready yet, but it's being flown around and tested, but it's not. The production models aren't there yet. They're just starting to come online. That's their stealth aircraft, or they claim to be stealth. And we'll see. I'm not sure. They've tried to copy our F-22, actually. But in any case, no one knows how well they can fight.
Yeah, I guess that's the big indicator. You can have all the best equipment, or quote, look like very good modern equipment, but it depends on the will of the fighter and the abilities of the fighter. So
that's right.
Jerry, go ahead.
Steve, during the prelude break, we were talking about the rather complicated relations between the U.S. and Taiwan, hearkening back to Mr. Kissinger and President Nixon, who basically threw over Taiwan for essentially capturing relations with China.
That's right.
You have about 2 minutes.
What happened after that?
Well, what happened was that we didn't do much for Taiwan. I mean, we were sort of out of Taiwan. We took our troops out of Taiwan, and military bases were taken out of Taiwan. We de-recognized Taiwan. We cut off any contacts between the two militaries, so the Taiwanese military couldn't talk to the American, couldn't coordinate with the American military. Essentially, we abandoned them. It was only because Congress in '79 passed the Taiwan Relations Act that some redress of the balance took place, but not a lot. And all the administrations, Republican and Democrat, until the recent one, which is different, have been very hesitant to commit very much to Taiwan for lots of reasons. I was in Taiwan in '96 when the Chinese tried to organize themselves to the missile operation and maybe an invasion. No one knew, and it took weeks to get 2 U.S. aircraft carriers positioned to let the Chinese know we were not going to permit that. But 2 weeks, like today, 2 weeks is dead. You're dead.
Yeah, especially when things move at the pace it does now with transportation. Yeah.
But 2 weeks is unacceptable. So that is essentially where we've been. And it's been a slow process of trying to turn the situation around and to begin to restore relations military to military. Taiwan has doesn't actually have a military mission in the U.S. It has a trade mission. That's all.
We're going to have to go to a break, Stephen. But when we come back, I'd like to pick it up right there. The discussion about Taiwan's abilities and capabilities would be something interesting to talk about. We have to go to a break, guys. Don't go away. I just want to remind you guys that are watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe right there. Hit the subscribe button and then the notification button, and you'll be able to watch the show or get notification of the show. And then also reminding you that you're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, guys, stand by.
Standing.
While I do my magic.
Have you ever wondered why they say stand by when you're mostly sitting?
I don't know.
So why don't we start out with what the U.S. is doing currently?
Yeah, sure.
In this area, particularly, I guess, Secretary of State Pompeo is, I guess, about to go into the region. I know he's got a deputy running around India and others, trying to create this quad, as they call it.
Yes. Yeah, well, that would be the ideal goal.
Yeah.
If it's manageable and if it can be done and if it would work. And it's very tricky waters, really. First, for lots of political reasons, it's not a simple equation.
Haven't we done things like send carrier task forces through the Taiwan Straits?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And sent those fancy planes from Guam up there?
Look, we're active all the way down to the South China Sea and up,
Right.
Quite active right now. And the Chinese are complaining about it, which is great. I want them to complain about it.
So that's the follow-on question that I'd like to do is how much of a provocation can we afford? Is this something that you, like you said, you're glad that they're kvetching about it, but how big is this provocation? Could it cause them to be triggered?
It's not a provocation to sail through international waters.
Well, of course, but I'm talking about the F-35 and
what the Chinese say. It's not a provocation to sail through international waters.
Right.
They just complained about it again because we sailed through the South China Sea close to their illegal possessions.
Right.
The man-made islands.
The man-made islands, yes.
Yeah, but we were in international waters.
Right.
So too bad.
That in the Malacca Straits, right?
All of it. I mean, China doesn't own those waters.
Okay, here we go. We're getting ready to start. Can you hear the lawnmower?
Okay. No.
Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
We're with Stephen Bryen. I'm Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon, and we're talking about Taiwan, what's been going on, the proposal that he had made about F-35s being leased. And I'm sure there are people mumbling under their breath thinking, we can't afford to do this. But we also have F-35s in many different countries already, correct? In the break, I mentioned something about, hey, is it, are we attempting or trying to provoke China as the United States have been accused of by other countries, including China, or are we just protecting our interest? What's the word?
I think we're protecting our interests very much so if we do this. In fact, supporting Taiwan is protecting our interests. It's a democratic country, a very vigorous democratic country. Mm-hmm. It's an economic power in its own right, and it's done very well. It would be a terrible thing to surrender the people of Taiwan to China's dictatorship. I don't see why we would do that.
Does China have a bone to pick on this deal in the sense that they are claiming ownership of Taiwan?
What kind of bone?
Well, I'm just saying, are they, what are they saying? Say again?
Do you mean a legal one, a political?
Right. Yeah, political, legal, it doesn't matter.
Well, they say Taiwan is historically part of China. And there's some grounds for that claim. but the Taiwanese people say the opposite.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who wins this argument? The people or some legal principle that the Chinese are pushing? Chinese don't care about legal principles when it goes against them. So, for example, they took these reefs and islands in the South China Sea, even after the International Court said that it didn't belong to China. They just said, all right.
Did it anyway.
Yeah, we're going in there and we're taking them. And they did. And nobody stopped them. So, China also claims Okinawa. Okay. They claim some of the Ryukyu Islands. I mean, so where does it start and where does it stop?
Right. At some point in the modern age, we've just got to draw the lines, and that's where it's going to stay.
But they made a thing out of this because it's somehow a test of Chinese manhood to say they've got to take back Taiwan because it's ours. Well, we could have said we want to take back Canada because it's ours. We're not doing it. I think it's enough already. The Chinese are essentially their own worst enemy on this. But they also want to try and, wear people down. There is a faction in Taiwan. I have to be clear. There's a faction in Taiwan, particularly in the old Kuomintang party, that supports some kind of amalgamation with China. What kind is a very complex issue, because since the Hong Kong mess, even Kuomintang in Taiwan has changed its tune and is less enthusiastic about having its rights, because there's not going to be a single independent politician in Taiwan if it's taken over by China. It's going to be controlled by the Communist Party, 100%.
Oh, nightmare.
Yeah.
Jerry, go ahead.
Steve, Secretary of State Pompeo is about to travel in that region, and there's the discussion of creation of a quad consisting of Australia, India, United States, and Japan. And is that the equivalent of a regional NATO in the context of defending something like Taiwan?
Could be. It could be. What about Taiwan? Can't they be a member?
Well, Taiwan could be a member.
What are they there for? To defend against what? I mean, the most likely scenario, if any kind of conflict, it would be an attack by China on one of the players, and the most likely target is Taiwan. So, I mean, if you leave Taiwan out, you're just perpetuating the same old mess.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's very complicated in Japan because, the Japanese are not so sure about how much they want to defend Japan. And they don't like militarism. They don't want, and the Chinese are working that issue very hard in Japan, with propaganda and with influence operations and with trade deals and, all kinds of stuff. So I'm not sure I'm not sure Japan is in a position to sign up to such a thing. It remains to be seen. And then Pompeo also is very keen on trying to get Japan to improve its defense capacity significantly, because they have this self-defense force, but it's not much, and it doesn't have much equipment, and it doesn't have much ambition, and it's not very useful. The thing that's most useful in Japan is the Air Force, which I think has got a lot of F-35s now. It's pretty good, and their Navy is good, especially their submarine force is excellent. That's their big stuff. When you get to the Army and all that, less interesting, less capable. So a regional agreement among the willing, what we used to call a coalition of the willing, would be a big step forward, but there isn't one. And remember, Japan doesn't always get along with all its neighbors aside from China. For example, Korea, where the relations between Japan and Korea are pretty bad. So it's a tricky thing. I don't think that. I think Pompeo will settle for improving Japan's defense capabilities, and Australia doesn't need to. I mean, Australia is very serious country that cares about its independence, and it's a very strong country.
So what then credence do you give to these programs called Fortress Taiwan on the part of the Rand Corporation and others in what you just discussed?
If we're thinking about Taiwan defending itself against China, it cannot. Okay, I mean,
Absolutely right.
it's not like the Arabs in Israel, where the Arabs were incompetent and the Israelis were competent. Okay, that was one showed the David and Goliath book, but the David and Goliath problem in China and Taiwan is a totally different picture. Taiwan's facing a formidable enemy, a big enemy with lots of weapons, and know how to use them, or at least we think they know how to use them. So the Fortress Taiwan by itself is not going to do it. What we really need is a defense treaty with Taiwan, to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
We don't have one. We don't have any agreement with Taiwan at all, other than the Taiwan Relations Act, which doesn't really provide for any commitment by the U.S. to defend to Taiwan. We're supposed to help give them military supplies to keep them competitive, so to speak, but there's nothing there that commits us to defend them.
That would be a major statement if the U.S. would broker that.
I don't think that's realistic.
You don't think it's going to happen?
Yeah.
So what we've got are these sideshow recommendations to at least illuminate what the vulnerability is of Taiwan to a possible invasion by China.
Yeah, I know we're doing some things. They just announced another arms sale this past week to Taiwan. Not all that exciting, but there's some good stuff in it. We're doing some things to give them some tools. But it's been let me give you one example just to show you how big a difficulty this thing. I was going to use a different terminology, but it's not nice on YouTube. Taiwan has its own indigenous fighter aircraft called the FCK-1. It's a pretty good aircraft. And of course, most of the parts came from the United States. Okay, some from Europe, but mostly from the US. When Taiwan was after an engine for this design, we restricted the engine so that the plane wouldn't be able to fly very far. Why? Well, they might attack China. Are you kidding me? Taiwan's going to attack China?
It's funny. I didn't know this.
Yeah, but they restricted it so the plane has what we call short legs. It can't go very far. Can't stay in the air very long.
Like a short-arm boxer.
Yeah, this is the kind of nonsense that was going on for years between the U.S. and Taiwan. And, they didn't have good aircraft until finally George Bush in 1991 approved F-16s. But the early model of the F-16, the ABs, now they're trying to upgrade them. They have a program to upgrade, which is very important. Okay, I'm all for it. They should be upgraded, and then Taiwan's also going to get F-16V, which is a very good airplane, but it's not a stealth aircraft. And again, when we're talking about the balance of forces, there has to be some way for Taiwan to survive an initial assault, to give the U.S. time to respond itself. We're not going to respond on day one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's actually what I would like to bring up in the break, after the break, so we can talk about it. The idea of air defense is, do they have those capabilities? Do they have capability of defending themselves from air attack or missiles? We don't have time to answer it right now, but when we come back, we will. So don't hold your breath. I would hate for you to pass out in the middle of the program. Guys, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you very much. Please take time to share it on social media. If you don't watch it on YouTube and you listen to it, please take time to share it from the Israel News Talk Radio website. And you can find it at israelnewstalkradio.com. We'll be right back after these very amazing messages. Okay, stand by, guys.
So, Steve, in this final section, do we want to do a wrap on the Taiwan stuff and segue into the mess in the South Caucasus, or avoid that?
That's fine. Let's do that.
What's that?
Yes.
Yes, meaning yes.
You
Yes,
said
we'll do it.
I said yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes means yes, as long as, at least they used to.
Well, in some cultures, the yes doesn't exactly.
We're with. Yeah, yes means maybe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, maybe that's correct.
I saw the funniest thing. I posted it on my Facebook page yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but it said homeschool parents need to watch this. And this woman, she's dressed up. She's got a beard, what do you call it? Painted on her face. And I think she's Israeli, but she's like she goes, okay, listen to me. She goes, if you have 5 apples and I take 2 apples, how many apples do I have? The little girl says, Papa, you have 2 apples. No. And she repeats this thing over and over and over. The girl's crying now. She goes, but Papa, you took 2 apples. You have 2 apples. No, I have 3. And there's this huge argument between the two of them.
Great. That's great.
It's like the who's on first deal, right?
Well, I saw one where there's 5 words and the teacher says, put them in alphabetical order. So the kid takes each word and puts it in alphabetical order. Which is the correct answer.
It is the correct answer. I've never seen. That's a good one.
It's the real one. I mean, it's actually happened. So.
Put this in alphabetical order.
So he had, dog. He put G-O-D.
Right. So here's the deal: is if he's right, does she give him the wrong, a bad grade? You would think she'd give him a good grade.
I didn't even do it right. I did it wrong. DGO. In alphabetical order. Are you ready?
Not quite. Hold on a second, please.
So, Steve, which of the Nagorno-Karabakh questions do we want to zero in on? The inventory?
Let's start. We have to finish the last question.
We have to finish the last question on Taiwan.
Whatever it was.
Also, Jerry.
Yeah.
Throw that pin in the trash.
What trend? Oh, I'm sorry.
Clicking.
All the way through the first 2 segments, you can hear the whole time.
Totally impatient.
Yeah, I
No,
to say something, but I keep.
It doesn't have. I'll impale myself.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Sorry about that, but it's just over here. It's magnified by probably 20. Stand by.
So when we come back, do we ask you for a wrap on this situation between Taiwan, China, and the U.S.?
I don't know. What was the question? I've forgotten.
Well, I was going to ask you about their air defense capabilities.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
And then we can move on from there to what.
Okay.
Yep. Already.
Okay, we're
And
queuing.
it's been thrown away.
Do what?
I threw it away.
Oh, you threw the pen away. I didn't literally mean for you to throw the pen away. Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
We are back in the final segment. I'm Rod Bryant along with Jerry Gordon and Stephen Bryen. We're having a really interesting discussion about Taiwan And the question I asked you, Stephen, before the break was about Taiwan's capabilities of defending herself from missiles, aircraft, or whatever.
Well, Taiwan has some air defenses, some pretty good ones, but not enough. They have the Patriot PAC-3, which is the most advanced Patriot. In fact, they just signed a contract to improve some of it and repair some of it. So it's a fairly healthy contract. It's $680 million, wow. A lot of money. Wow. The system costs $6.5 billion. So
wow.
Not cheap.
No, not cheap at all.
So that's their major one. They also have lots of shoulder-fired man-pads missiles. They have a system called Tiankung 2, which is one they developed themselves, which is actually originally based on the Nike Hercules, which is good for high-altitude threat. And they have Hawk. They still have Hawk operating, improved Hawk, which is the U.S. no longer has them, but
right.
But they're a good system,
very reliable system.
Yeah. So they have some stuff,
right?
But the problem the U.S. has more generally is that nowadays the kind of threat comes at all different levels.
I was just going to say with the
drones, you have guided all this stuff flying at you, and you have to sort it out,
right?
And get enough of your own missiles in the air to knock them out. Patriot's not real good at that,
right?
That's one of its shortcomings, and it's also not good kinetically against some of these heavy threats. About the other stuff, I don't really know enough to tell you, but it's a challenge for Taiwan.
Well, I tell you, simply China has the capability, we know this for sure, of overwhelmingly sending munitions, weapons, planes, missiles. They can just overwhelm a system, and that would be just as good as anything else out there.
They can't knock it out.
Right.
That's the key. If you can find ways where they can't knock it out, then you have something. I visited the island of Kinmen, also known as Quemoy, a number of times. It's about a mile from China.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
There's Quemoy, and then right across the water there's Greater Amoy, which is China. And Quemoy was shelled heavily in the 1950s, 58, I think it was. Remember the famous debate, Nixon Kennedy debate, where they were talking about what to do about Quemoy and Matsu. And Kennedy wanted to defend Quemoy and Matsu. It's pretty hard to defend. But what the Taiwanese did on Quemoy, I've never been to Matsu, but I've been to Quemoy, is almost everything's underground in bomb shelter. Even the city hospital is underground.
Okay, so their answer is to be hardened.
Yeah, they hardened the island. That's right. Now, whether it would still work today, how many years ago was that? 58, so you could do the math. 40, 50, 60 years ago. I'm not sure, but it's very impressive when you see it.
I bet. Jerry, did you want to lead on some questions?
Yeah, I did. Turning to the war in South Caucasus between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the breakaway Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, who are the players and why is Israel there supplying weapons?
Well, because the Azerbaijanis bought them.
Correct.
That was the main reason. Look, starting with who's there. The Russians are on both sides. They've supplied equipment to Azerbaijan, and of course they're really sponsors of Armenia, and they supply equipment to Armenia. So the fundamental equipment in use, for the most part, is Russian. But in recent years, Azerbaijan in particular has acquired quite a few systems from Europe and from Israel, and also even from Belarus. and they have been, both sides, but mostly Armenians are talking to the Chinese, which has made the Russians unhappy. So now, there's a lot of different kinds of systems that have gone in, but I think the big player is still the Russians from a military point of view. All the other stuff is sort of supplemental. Now, the Turks have also supplied weapons, especially their Bayraktar drone, which is a TB2 drone, which has performed very well. So the Turks have been doing that. And there are allegedly, and it's alleged because everybody denies it, but I think it's true, there's at least 2 and maybe 4 Turkish F-16s that are operating in Azerbaijan. Where they are at the moment is anybody's guess. But they were the ones that, one of them apparently is the one that shot down the Sukhoi, the Armenian Sukhoi 25. So now from Israel's point of view, Azerbaijan's really very important. First of all, Azerbaijan is very friendly to Israel. It's a Muslim country. But the relationship between Israel and Azerbaijan is normal. Secondly, Azerbaijan is a very tolerant country. There is an active and successful, more than one Jewish community in Azerbaijan, and have never been interfered with. They do both Ashkenazi ones and Sephardic ones. So they had that benefit, let's call it that, for the Jews that live there. And they've lived there for hundreds of years. The thing that people don't notice is that about as many Azerbaijanis are in Azerbaijan or in Iran. Don't discount the importance of that. It's extraordinarily important to Israel. It's extraordinarily important to the United States. But we talk about 10 or 15 million Azerbaijanis in Iran.
I did not know that. So at some level, this is an asset on the ground.
Asset, especially nowadays. And I mean, you can imagine what the value is. I'm not going to even tell you what it is.
Yeah, I have to. But don't want to stir up any more trouble. You've already got enough.
I don't want to go there. But I think that the fact is that that's a significant thing. And that influences Israel's posture toward Azerbaijan. By the way, the Israeli courts today or yesterday said there's no basis for stopping arms sales to Azerbaijan.
Wow, big move. Yeah.
Yes.
So because there was a peace group in Israel that took that to court, demanding that arms sales to Azerbaijan stop, and they lost. So the court says, isn't any proof that they've done anything illegal? They're defending Azerbaijani territory. Nagorno-Karabakh, legally, according to the UN, belongs to Azerbaijan. Now, why they'd want it is another story entirely. There's about 150,000 people there, that's it, in that territory, and 85% of them are Armenians. Most of the Azerbaijanis have been run out of there. But, they've been unable to reach a settlement of this issue for 20 years, 30 years. And it's really an issue that ought to be settled. I mean, there are compensations one can think of that could be put in place. The refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan need compensation. They lost their homes, their properties, their businesses. There's a territorial issue that needs compensation. They've been trying. Now the Moscow is sponsoring another. I don't want to call it a peace conference because it's not quite that, but it's a consultation in Moscow with the parties to try and restart what's called the Madrid process. The U.S., EU, Russians are all part of this peace process, the Madrid agreement. It's failed every time it's been tried in the past, mostly because the Armenians have been inflexible. And remember, the Armenian, that this Nagorno-Karabakh has also been declared an independent republic. I don't know if you know that, called the Republic of Artsakh, Artsakh, which has its own leader, but it doesn't have its own currency. And it only has a part of it, its own army. The rest of them are Armenian troops with a different hat. And, they've been belligerent as well. So to try and find some compromise has been very difficult because of posturing, a little bit by both sides. But I think the Armenians have been hardliner. When they got close to an agreement before, the Armenians bailed out, said, no, we're not doing it. And it quite upset the Russians because the Russians didn't want that. They wanted a settlement. The Russians don't need this as a problem.
Well, I'm hoping that one day peace becomes such a problem that we don't have to worry about. It would ruin our show. We'd only be able to talk about peace in the world. That would be nice to have. But for now, it does seem, though, with asymmetrical warfare, with terrorism, there is a lot of shifting sand in all of this. And strength is very important for our country to have, as well as the United States and what do you call freedom-loving countries. It's important to have the power. Guys, we're at the end of the show. Stephen, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You're a real mensch. You can go now take your nap, milk the cows, whatever you do.
Interrupted it very badly. So
okay. So, guys, it's great seeing you here today on YouTube, and we'll see you next week at the same time here on Israel News Talk Radio. Okay. Beautiful.
Good.
It's great.
As usual, you're brilliant.
Thank you so much. Telling the guy that was giving me the answers.
Okay, just look under the desk. Thank you.
Well, I mean, like Biden.
Okay. There is look. I learned something very valuable because of this whole conflict between Azerbaijan and who are the party players. I really didn't know who all they were.
Oh, yeah. I have some numbers, but I think Azerbaijan has a population of just under 10 million. Okay. And Iran has an Azerbaijani population of around, it's hard to count because the Iranians don't like it to be counted.
So you're almost saying half the country's population.
Oh, it's way more. It's about 15 million in Iran.
Wow.
So it's more than the population of Azerbaijan, really. If you accept,
right.
Armenia is 2.9 million.
Wow.
It's much smaller.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's backed by Russia. So the Russians let really bad things happen to Armenia. But on the other hand, they don't want them stirring up trouble.
No, they don't need it right now.
It doesn't.
Why is Turkey in there on the ground?
Well, that's another question I wanted to ask, but we didn't have time. Yeah. What's Turkey meddling in this?
They want to push the Russians out.
Yeah. Oh.
And show first of all, they hate the Armenians.
Right.
Racially, religiously, whatever you want to call it. They did a genocide against.
Right.
More than one.
Right.
The last one was in 1915, something like that.
1915 and back in 1895.
Yeah. So they really hate them. They hate Christians too. And keep that in mind as well. They're not
They're also.
Yeah. And they're taking other churches, turning them into mosques. They're on a big bender to restore the Ottoman Empire.
Oh yeah, that's Erdogan's fantasy.
It's a big.
I'm sure he sleeps on that fantasy every night.
A lot of people are going to be dead while they're having the chance.
Right.
So anyway, the point being that so they see a way to sock it to the Armenians. They see a way to displace the Russians as the number one poobah with Azerbaijan.
So this is why they're going into Syria and recruiting terrorists to go in.
Yeah, sure.
Jihadis.
Yeah, well, they like killing people. And so,
I don't know. I guess the thing is when you have, I'm still troubled over Turkey. It's like when you have a bedfellow like that, that is a horrible situation for this country to be in. And then
for Azerbaijan to be in.
No, for the U.S. our relationship with Turkey. I understand why we have it, but these guys, that Erdogan's a.
Well, we're trying to bet on the long game as
yeah. You're hoping one day he dies or there's a free election, right?
Well, yeah, they're not too good at that, but either one. But yeah, I think so. I think we're hoping to keep Turkey in NATO somehow, and to weather this political storm, hoping that the jihadist kind of attitudes have a half-life and it'll go away.
Right.
And we've not helped the Kurds very much as a consequence to.
No, we have not.
To pay the price of retaining Turkey. The Russians have ambitions of capturing influence in Turkey. I mean, serious influence in Turkey, and replacing the U.S., which would then put a threat on the underbelly of NATO, which is something the Russians like. They like to cause trouble, and this would make it happen. So that's the state of play, so to speak.
Right.
Shooting down a Russian airplane in Armenia is not something that makes the Russians very happy.
No. You're batting zero on that deal. Well, Stephen, we're going to holler at you later. We're going to also say bye to the YouTubers. Thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Okay, getting ready to start the show.